Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guests today are Kamran Zaki and Roelant Prins. Kamran is the Chief Operating Officer and Roelant the Chief Customer Officer of Adyen, a Dutch unified commerce company that provides end-to-end payments, data, and financial management for its customers. The company has grown remarkably in recent years, going from a venture-backed unicorn to a public company that earns roughly €1 billion in annual revenue. I look forward to hearing more about the company's growth and the ambition these executives have for the future of the company. Kamran, Roelant, welcome to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Thanks for having us, Peter.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure. Kamran, maybe I'll begin with you if you don't mind. I know from our past conversations that Adyen is Surinamese for start over again, perhaps in some ways emblematic of the company's original mission of building a modern infrastructure directly connected to card networks and local payment methods across the world, allowing for unified commerce, a topic I'd like to get into in more depth in a moment. But could you provide a quick thumbnail sketch? I provided the quickest of them, and please perhaps go a little bit deeper, if you would, as to the business you all are in.
Absolutely. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, to your point, our founders had a company before Adyen that was in the payment space that they sold off. Roelant was part of that company as well. And when we first started, we were actually a technical partner for global companies who had payment needs around the world, and we would help them connect to different banks or providers. What we quickly realized over the years was that a lot of those providers were built on legacy infrastructure, right? Mainframe systems built over 30 years, grown through M&A. And then often when things went wrong, it was really hard to figure out how to troubleshoot it and how to offer a great customer experience. So we evolved from there. We were able to get sort of a payments institute license in Europe, eventually a bank license. We became direct members of Visa and MasterCard and in other parts of the world, and really started providing an end-to-end capability for e-commerce and mobile payments for large enterprise customers, right? Early days, it was customers, for example, like Vodafone or KLM, Groupon International, etc. From there, technology advanced, and you touched on unified commerce. We realized we could also support in-person payments, right? So basically, it was our software, our security on top of sort of the third-party hardware. And the real capability we were bringing is we're already helping you globally for digital payments. Now we can help you sort of in person as well. And we can really then be somewhat unique in supporting you globally and across all channels on the same modern technical infrastructure. And it's advanced a bit from there. So we got additional customer feedback and needs. And one of the things that started taking off was marketplace and platform business models, right? And they said, hey, we have lots of small business customers. And so in addition to offering just the basic payment capabilities around the world and across channels, can you also help us with some of the regulatory compliance aspects of how do you do KYC, know your customer, or AML, anti-money laundering for onboarding these? And then, hey, once we collect the payments, also can you help us pay out to these customers around the world? So we launched what has since then become Adyen for Platforms, where if you have a marketplace or platform business model, you can partner with Adyen and offer embedded payments, right? So we are inherently B2B in nature. So it's a quasi white label offering where, these small businesses don't even see Adyen by and large, right? They just are using the platform to run their business and for their payment capabilities. And then the newest part of our business is we started hearing these are small businesses, and so they have additional needs. For example, small businesses typically need working capital. And if you're offering working capital, how do you get that to them quickly? Or how do you give them the proceeds of all the payments you process more quickly? So we are able to offer business accounts to them and also debit cards. So the best example is you're a platform, your small business needs working capital. We process all the payments. We have a lot of data. We can use the data to say we're willing to underwrite a loan for, let's say, $10,000 because your restaurant customer wants to buy a new stove or ice machine or a bunch of things. It's instantly approved. If they say they want to take it, we can instantly put those $10,000 in a business/bank account for them. And we can also attach a debit or prepaid card to it so they can start using those instantly to buy the goods and services or raw materials from that bank account or in a physical environment with that debit or prepaid card. And it's still, we are B2B. This is sort of an embedded financial product experience where it's really the platform serving their end customer. So that's how things have evolved over the last 16 years, probably a bit more than a quick thumbnail sketch, but wanted to try and explain what we do because it's expanded quite a bit over the years, both in depth, breadth, and geographic scope.
Remarkable. Thank you so much, Kamran, for that overview. Roelant, I'd love to turn to you and dive a little bit further into this concept of unified commerce. We heard a bit about some of the connection points from Kamran a moment ago, but I wonder if you could take a bit more of provide a bit more of a context as to what that means and why it's a key ingredient for digital transformation in your mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll try and explain it a bit also in how, the world of commerce and retail has evolved over the years. If we go way, way, way back, of course, there was just a single channel. You would go to a store and buy products. Very simple. Then the next phase came, let's say early 2000s, when we started to talk about multi-channel. Yeah, we're not only selling in a store, we're also selling online, and we're selling through call center typically. Those were multiple channels through which you're able to sell your product. Fast forward a bit further, multi-channel turns into omni-channel. The driver for that was really, hey, we're not seeing these three channels, traditional channels anymore. There's now also a phone, there is social media, there's all these other different evolving channels that you can buy on. And it basically was a way to say, hey, retailers, you need to service customers wherever they want to buy your products. Make sure you're able to offer it. Could also be platforms like Amazon, etc. But it's always been taken by the angle of make sure consumers can buy with you in any different channel and facilitate that. Now, unified commerce is very much a next step, and it's very much a next step in how consumers interact with brands. Where there's a few additional factors that play a key role, in my opinion. So number one is personalization. So instead of where can I buy, people want to be offered a much more personalized service. They want to see products that really matter to them and expect that sort of service levels. Secondly, convenience has become a really big item. Convenience in, it should be really simple to purchase something with a retailer, but also if something goes wrong or I want to return an item, it needs to be super simple. I want to be able to buy something online, return it in a store, or whatever combination I, as a consumer, prefer. So that's really the third element. Shopping's very much evolved towards, hey, I want to be in control as a consumer, and it shouldn't be dictated by the brand. So where does unified commerce play? Unified commerce comes in because that's really a terminology that talks about providing an infrastructure as a retailer that enables to provide shoppers these really personalized ways to interact with you across any channel they like for any different situation they prefer. And that infrastructure, of course, it goes for how you fulfill products, but also payments turns out to play a really big role there to enable this dream world, this situation that you want to create, because payment really unlocks a lot of possibilities. It unlocks the possibility, if you buy something online, return it in store, to make a refund super simple. It also gives a lot of customer data, and that customer data is exactly what retailers are looking for to offer you personalized products. We've learned over the years that data is so key to make all this possible, and that payments is really one of the only ways to get access to that. So in summary, unified commerce is about delivering this new way where consumers are really in control on how they shop with retailers, and payments can really provide that.
Very interesting. Staying with you for a moment longer, Roelant, I wanted to ask you, the past 2.5 years of the pandemic have led to some rather remarkable changes across the landscape, and certainly retail is no different from that. And I wonder, as somebody who works with so many leading brands around the world, what sorts of challenges you help them face, what you learn from them, frankly, and perhaps by extension, as a leader, longstanding leader within this organization, your own personal learnings from the dynamism of these times.
Yeah, there's quite a number of things. I think one learning is that a crisis like that really unlocks a lot of innovation because you have to. And for many years we've seen that, especially in retail, innovation and change was hard. There's a lot of legacy out there. There's so many different priorities, and to make real technology change in these companies is really difficult. For a long time, we saw that the in-store teams within retail and the online teams in retail were operating quite separately. Yeah, that's all a thing of the past. Where the pandemic has really played a big role is to really accelerate the role of technology. It's really accelerated it by years, and it means that we're now seeing QR codes in many places where we didn't see them at all, in restaurants, in coffee bars, and people like it. People use it. It's a convenient way to order, but also to pay for services. We see the other thing that we've seen is that for a long time, data has been a big promise of unified commerce in retail. But it never was getting to a stage where people really benefited from it. It remained a promise for a long time. And I think what we've seen in the pandemic is that there have been a lot of situations where, for example, large retailers had to shut down all their stores, saw their online sales go through the roof. But then they were making a lot of assumptions around, like, hey, who are these shoppers? Are they all our existing shoppers that have moved from in-store physical retail shopping to online, or are they real net new shoppers? And the payment data that we can provide to them gives a lot of that information. We can tell them, this percentage of people have shopped with you before, this percentage of people have never been with you before, and it gave them so much more insights. That I think what we've seen is that retailers have really seen the real benefit of data in how they can run their business. They've seen that it's actually possible, and they can now build on that. And I think that's been really a breakthrough, which has been quite exciting, to be honest.
Yeah, and if I could just add on, Roelant, one practical example I think both of us were discussing with our teams today was one of our customers is a pizza chain. And they were looking at their own data, and they saw Peter, right? And they said, hey, Peter has bought from us 2 times in the last year, every 6 months, and that's it. And that's because they were only looking at one channel. And once we were able to look at the online and the physical, they realized, Peter only ordered twice online, but Peter came in to pick up a pizza every week for the last year. Right. And so Peter could be one of their top 5% or 1% customers, but because they were historically fragmented in terms of payments and how they were able to aggregate and concatenate the data, they really didn't know who their most loyal customers were. And I think that's just a really practical example that hopefully brings this to life for people of how valuable this can be and why we really started focusing on it for retail, but also for food and beverage and hospitality and sort of a couple of relevant industry verticals.
Very interesting examples that each of you share. I really appreciate that. Kamran, I was reflecting as you were going through your the evolution of the business, that very nice description you provided of its evolution, that was a very tidy description that I have to imagine involved all sorts of complications as this organization grew, became more complex, went into new geographies. You were part of that as your first role with the organization was as president of North America, and no doubt, sort of learning the American market and taking what had been very successful in its European roots and going into new geographies and so forth. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit about some of the operational hurdles that you had to clear in order to be a successful now international brand that you have become. I think of like the regulatory issues associated with all that you bring to life, to say nothing, of course, of making contact with the necessary brands and each of the new geographies you go into and establishing that customer base and so on. Talk a bit about some of the learnings there, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think great question. I think as you may have picked up from our answers, I think with us, everything starts from customer or prospective customer feedback, right? Again, we focus heavily on enterprise customers, so it's not one of those where we know better, and if we build it, they will come. It's really a partnership, right? Of, hey, what are you trying to accomplish in your business? What are your strategic goals and priorities? And how could we help with that, right? So one aspect is international growth or payments, right, is critical for many companies, especially if you're primarily online or mobile. You can go global even faster because you don't need physical infrastructure or locations. In the US, we're very used to historically debit and credit cards being the predominant way we pay, right? Even in the US, that's grown a lot, where you now have Apple Pay, Google Pay, PayPal, Square Cash App, many buy now, pay later brands like Afterpay, Klarna, Affirm. And we offer all of those in the US. So in the US, as an example, one benefit is sort of, the omni-channel capability, but also being able to offer all these different payment methods through one connection, right? Time to market, speed, it's one implementation, and these are all configurations. Then you add on sort of international, and outside the US, people actually pay in many different ways, right? So of course there's cards, but there's different wallets. There's also bank accounts, there's cash. In fact, in Netherlands, because Roelant's based here and I happen to be here this week at head office, the most popular online payment method is something called Ideal, right? And it's basically a way to pay from your bank account, but it's not what we're used to in the US, like direct debit. It's sort of like Zelle, but it's been around for a lot longer, right? Where it's, hey, you're at the checkout page and you say, I pick Ideal, and you basically redirect it to your online banking page. You sign in and authenticate the transaction, and a real-time confirmation happens, and then the money gets transferred. This is the way the majority of people want to buy goods online and mobile, right? And how do you make sure you can offer it? Because that's what your customers want. So we've been able to expand around the world and say we can support your card needs, but also all these local payment method needs. To your point, the complexity is what are those relevant payment methods? And we have teams on the ground in more than 26 countries to bring that expertise. Then it's, hey, how do you build it, right? Some of these are real time. Some of these are asynchronous. Hey, how do we simplify it and do it in a consistent framework? So again, for our customers, it's one implementation. And after that, it's easy to just configure these and add them with very little to no work incrementally, right? The third example is, to your point, regulatory, right? Some of these you can accept with an entity in the US. Some you need a local entity. You need licenses for the money movement, the payouts. And we've gone and figured that out around the world. In Europe, for example, we have a full bank license. In the US, we have a branch license now, and relevant in other parts of the world. And then, you layer on the other things we've already talked about, being able to do this across physical, if you're omni-channel. What if you have a platform business model? We see more and more customers have multiple business models, right? So they are retailers who started with sort of retail, online, physical. They're testing a marketplace model where you can sell the used clothes, right? Rather than it going to a third party. We have sort of digital goods merchants who are getting into merchandising, right? And sort of creator economy, and wanting to enable their users to create content and be able to sell it directly to Roelant and you and I. And that becomes an Adyen for Platforms customer. So to your point, look, it's taken us 16 years and listening to our customers and a lot of hard work and a lot of iteration, right? Often between customers and us, you don't get it immediately perfect the first time out the door, but how do you quickly then iterate and build on that? And I think Roelant has a great story. He was recently in Mexico that maybe he could add on to, of how we've launched additional capabilities there, but how we leverage what we've built over the last 10 years to make it sort of really leapfrog what's available locally.
Yeah, that's I think a great example of how our model works, and how over time you create a lot of value for customers. We have, as Kamran said, we started at the time really supporting e-commerce merchants. Quickly we had success with working for a lot of retail brands online, and then they started to ask us around, like, can you also help us in store for all the reasons we talked about. So we did that. We started it like 10 years ago, and over those years, we've learned a lot. We've constantly improved, and And by now, it's a very extensive solution that supports many different payment terminals for many different payment use cases. It supports a lot of data and reporting across the different channels for a lot of customer insights, and really also supports all these new customer journeys that people are looking at, like using mobile for shopping and checkout in store, etc. Now, over the past years, we've been also expanding into Mexico, for example. We typically do that by looking at our customer demand. They're really asking us like, hey, can you help us in Mexico? That's an important country for us. So we start to figure it out. We start to build, and we take the long-term approach. We know it's not going to be easy. It's going to take a while. And so a few years ago, we launched for online e-commerce. We had to learn a lot. Again, we started to work with local retailers in Mexico, and I was there 3 years ago. We started working for a large fashion retailer with their online business. We helped them a lot with fraud reduction, etc., which is a big topic in Mexico. And then very recently, we launched our in-person payment solution in Mexico. So we we built a solution that we've been investing in for the last 10 years and really made it right for the local market in Mexico. And now we're launching that. And the beauty is that they can, it's not like a new solution for that specific market we launch and then we go again. No, they can tap into something that has been built with all the knowledge and all the learnings we've built out with the likes of H&M, Uniqlo, etc. And they can tap into that. So they really can tap into a highly developed solution tailored now for the Mexican market. So then you can start to see these effects of bringing all that global experience into a solution and take that into a country like that, which I think is a quite exciting path, because there's a lot of value in it for those customers.
I wanted to ask you, Roelant, I wonder, with the company, the company's roots in the Netherlands, and with big ambitions that clearly from the early stages were to operate far beyond the borders of just that country. With European roots, your expansion immediately goes into areas where there are very different cultural elements, as Kamran just mentioned a moment ago, different nuances to how business is done, how shoppers wish to shop, and how payments are transacted, and so forth. A lot of American companies, this market is so enormous that the blessing that eventually becomes a curse for some as they go internationally is just thinking that it's a rinse and repeat. What works in the US will work elsewhere. And then you take what is a successful model in one country that then ends up failing in other places for the lack of that nuance. I wonder if there were advantages, if you see advantages for just realizing from the very earliest stages the necessity to translate the model with each country that you went to, perhaps in a different way than some of your peers as technology startups would have done. And you certainly joined this organization when it was just a startup. The advantages of that pathway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. We started here in the Netherlands. It's a tiny country. Less people living here than in the capital of Mexico. So, it means you have to start internationally, right? You can't build a whole business in this country and then start to look after a few years, where do we go next? Now, from day one, we knew this is going to be a global business. This is going to be a global solution. Our first customer was actually not a Dutch company, it was a German customer. So from day one, we started with that mindset. We knew, and then you start building initially for customers in Europe, and more international countries we were adding to the solution. And the beauty of that is that you instantly design the platform to be able to deal with all these different payment methods. Of course, card processing is a really big component, but a lot of different local payment methods, whether they're internet banking, buy now, pay later. We supported buy now, pay later way before it got launched in the US. And therefore, there's so much experience in the platform with all that sort of complexity, not only on how you process a payment, but also how you do the reporting, how you optimize for that. And I think the beauty now is, if we look back, because if you would have asked me like 10 years ago, hey, how do you look at the US market? At the time, we would like, oh yeah, that's maybe quite a commodity. How much added value is there for that market? We weren't sure. Yeah, that's completely changed. We're having lots of success in the US right now, because of our ability to deal with all these different payment methods that are now also everywhere in the US, right? I mean, there's so many different ways to pay now beyond cards in the US market. And secondly, all that experience I talked about in retail that we launched in Mexico, I mean, it's the same in the US. There's the same needs that retailers have. We've got the experience of dealing with that in 30, 40 different countries. So there's a lot of logic that we can now share with customers in the US that they very much appreciate. So a lot more complexity has gone into payments, as payments have very much transitioned from being much more commodity run by financial institutions towards now a real technology heavy space where there's constant change, and it's a much more strategic area for how you interact with your customers. So that's I think timing wise, it's been very much in our favor, and we now benefit from that after 15 years of investing though. But
yeah, and if I could add, Roelant and Peter, to Roelant's point, I think you sort of start getting network effects, right? So again, we started off in a few countries with a few customers, and last year, as an example, Peter, we processed €500 billion on the platform, right, for many global brands across digital and unified commerce. One of the newer markets for us is Japan, right? And so not only is it that, hey, we're launching Japan and we can now serve Japanese customers, but all of our existing global base that has a business in Japan can choose to use us, right? And then it comes down to Roelant's point, like, how are we differentiated? What's the value add? And if they're already buying into it, then it's an easier conversation. It's a very light lift for them, right, compared to before. And it also helps us that then in that new sort of country, we immediately have customers who are going live with us, right, bringing volume to bear. And then, hey, that's also a good proof point for then customers in Japan, where two examples, right? Amazon Japan has selected us, right, as their partner in Japan, and two, Uniqlo was already a customer using us outside of Japan. And so now, hey, it's still their choice and decision, but if they've been happy with us, we can have the discussion of what are their challenges in Japan, what do they like, how could we either immediately or what else would we build, right, to make it really the right partner for them in their home market. So again, continuing to listen to customers, continuing to build brings sort of course, incremental benefits to us, but more importantly to them. And that is sort of really how we really come up with most of the new ideas and things we do.
Very, very interesting. Roelant, I'd love to go back to you for just a moment. The international expansion you just described, how is the talent for the organization reflected that? So how, where do you have centers of people or regional presences, and how has that continued to expand as a result of the business's expansion globally?
Yeah, there's it evolves, and it also evolves in what we think is necessary, is required to grow for the next phase. I think traditionally we followed a model of being very close to our customers. Because we're running a global platform, but we really make sure that we localize it to make sure it's a very localized solution. So as a consequence, there's more than 26 offices nowadays with local people in countries like Singapore, Australia, Japan. We're all over Europe in all these different countries. We're in the US and Canada, Brazil, Mexico. The reason for that is these markets all have their specific requirements. They have their specific developments. We want to be right next to them. And we also want to be very close to our customers. We want to see them. We want to spend time with them. And we want to support and grow them together. So that's how we've evolved. So step by step over those years, we've expanded and set up offices, which typically have been more commercial offices with account management and salespeople, marketing, that sort of functions, which has served us really, really well. With some regional hubs. We started in the Netherlands. We set up a big hub in San Francisco, similarly in Singapore and Sao Paulo. But since, we have big ambition. We started, as Kamran said, we developed this platform solution. We're developing further banking services. So there's much, much more to do. And as a consequence, we felt like, hey, we'd like to have broader development and engineering capabilities. We, for a long time, centralized it. We thought that's a great idea. People work really closely together. But for further scaling, further growing, we saw that there's really the need to expand it. So we started to open up more regional hubs with engineering focus. We've done it in Madrid, we've done it in Chicago, and we continue to look out for ways to do that, because we need to scale further, and we're looking at different places to find to tap into different talent pools, really, to further grow the organization, to realize our ambitions.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I appreciate you giving that overview. Kamran, I wanted to ask you, one of the things I found very interesting as I've learned more about Adyen and gotten to know you a bit better is that you've reached this remarkable scale and grown so much as we've described. But despite that fact, your technology has been built in-house, and you've also grown organically as opposed to doing so through M&A. Both those factors would likely be surprising to some, at least, as they hear the story of Adyen. Talk a bit about the rationale behind this approach, as well as the advantages of it, please.
Yeah, absolutely. We think it's the core differentiator, to be honest, right? Of the fact that you have, as we said, all the relevant payment methods in all these different countries across all these different channels with our own licenses, and that we can provide it to you end to end. And the fact that it's one platform and one global instance sort of is what allows us to keep the speed, and also makes it so easy that once you've integrated, it really is easy to add the incremental payment methods or countries or channels, right? In some or many cases, honestly, it's just configuration changes. There's no incremental engineering work, right? And of course, you should test it, right? It's a new XYZ, but apart from that, it's really seamless. And we think that's been possible because we built everything in-house and we haven't done M&A. And if you look at the majority of the large sort of legacy providers, I think the industry has grown through M&A. Prior to Adyen, I was also at Netflix, so I was on the customer side, right? Using a lot of different players. And you find it's really hard to then offer a consistent customer experience, because you can have one API, but again, as the data flows through all the different underlying sort of tenants or points, things got hard-coded over the years, right? The people who built it have moved on. It really isn't seamless. So we think it is a pretty unique differentiator. We are able to keep the speed in developing and launching new capabilities. And it is a core asset, right, of what makes it so easy for our customers to move fast and time to market. So that's why, look, you never say never, right? We're pretty adamant, we're pretty vocal that we don't have an active M&A strategy. And the planned idea is to keep developing all of this in-house. And that ties back to Roelant's point. But of course, we want to scale our teams. Of course, we want to diversify talent base. Of course, we want to have it closer to our customers, and why we've opened the new offices and the new hubs, right? In Madrid, but also Chicago, and we'll continue looking at additional opportunities from there.
That's fascinating. You mentioned a moment ago, Kamran, your time at Netflix. You were the head of global payments for that company, in fact, and we're with another sort of legendary, the original fintech by some people's estimation, in PayPal for about 7 years. And so payments are clearly something you know quite well from a variety of different standpoints. Talk a bit about how Adyen first got on your roadmap as somebody who's, had reason to think about this more than most.
Yep. I'd met Adyen as a potential customer, but that was well before we were doing anything. And then honestly, it was coincidental. A common acquaintance connected Peter, who's the Adyen CEO and co-founder, and and said, hey, I think you two would like each other, and it's just networking, and why don't you have a chat? And I think, I guess 9.5 years ago now, we chatted on Skype, right? In those days, I think Zoom technically was a company, but I don't know that there was a product live. Honestly, we just, sort of built a relationship from there. I had the privilege of going to Amsterdam, met Roelant and some of the other founding team. And in the end, it comes back to today's discussion, right? Like, what fascinated me was the vision, right? That, hey, we're building everything in-house. We want to do it end to end, not just digital and e-com, but also unified commerce. And also, I think, honestly, we haven't talked as much today, but I think we should, is the culture, right? of, Roelant, Peter, others had company before. They were quite mature. They were like, we're building this for the long term. This is not to make a quick buck and move on. Culture is a very important part. How do we want to build this company, right? How do we want to work together? And I think that is something that is fairly unique to us and is a big reason why we are able to attract talent and retain it and really keep this discipline of long-term focus, long-term growth, and not sort of reacting to sort of quarterly pressures and things like that. Those were the reasons, honestly, I joined. And I think in different words why I'm still here, right? People say 9 years is a long time in this day and age. But, it comes down to two things. I think one, I find I'm still learning after being in payments for 15 to 20 years. It's fascinating, right? So many countries, payment methods, channels, business models, our own growth, right? I joined, we were 150 people approximately. And, we're, I think, 2,500 plus, and processing huge volumes. And the other is the culture, right? I really like the people I work with, and I like the fact that we're really able to help solve complex problems for our customers. As long as we can keep doing those, then there should be no shortage of fun challenges ahead.
Roelant, as somebody you I mentioned earlier, and obviously is a part and parcel of the role you have as Chief Customer Officer, you speak with customers around the globe, and I'm curious now, as you sort of are taking their temperature as to things that excite them or worry them, or as they're planning for the year ahead, as we're doing this interview late in the year of 2022. What are some of the things that are you're hearing, and likewise, how is that influencing your own roadmap as you look to the year or a couple of years ahead?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we service three different categories at a very high level. But on the one hand side, it's these large digital merchants for whom their audience is really people across the globe, and they continue to want to look at how can we reach more people with more localized payment methods. So that's something that hardly ever stops because there's so much change constantly, and that will continue. And the other big theme there is constant optimization. These companies are really looking for the best experience in payments, the highest number of successful payments, the lowest number of declined transactions, full automation of processes, etc. And that's what we're heavily focused around. It's and that will go on. Now, if you then look at the next area, that's very much around what we call unified commerce, a lot of retail, food and beverage, hospitality, and the ongoing theme there is convenience, and we all see it day by day, right? So go to a hotel. How often don't you get a bit annoyed waiting in line if you want to rush a checkout? I mean, we all recognize this. These are the themes that people are working on right now. How can we make it more easy, more convenient? Retail is all about giving consumers choice. It's all about loyalty. How can we make it better? On the one hand, combine creating a real good experience for our customers when they visit us, build brand loyalty. How can we interact, engage with them? And again, data, giving access to data plays a key role. So I think in retail, creating these new experiences, new customer journeys, and loyalty are big themes. And a lot of that centers around payments, and payments unlocks a lot of that thing. So that stuff we're working very intensely on to make that possible. Very much a long-term approach. And then finally, this new chapter for us, which is about enabling platforms, online platforms that are enabling smaller sellers to sell their items across the world, but also platforms in the physical world, enable them to accept payments, enable them to have their merchants accept payments and beyond, really helping them become platforms that offer wider banking services. Yeah, that's a whole new economy out there, which is very exciting for a lot of us. It's a very long-term approach, but we're now putting, we're putting the things in place together with them to try and build this together, and that's a very exciting path because you're really, working on a whole new terrain, which is very exciting for us.
Well, that long-term approach has certainly served you all very well. It's certainly a thread that runs through this. Well, Kamran, Zaki, Roelant, Prins, thank you both so much for spending time with me today, sharing a bit of the perspectives of this remarkable company, its growth, its future. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for having us, Peter.